Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the session of Crops and Undercover. My name is Linel Rivera Rodriguez, and I'm a Research and Extension Associate here in the Organic Program. I just have one quick announcement. For the last three talks today, they're going to be from 4 to 5 p.m. It says 4:15 to 5:15, but it's 4 to 5 p.m. I'm going to go around and give you some session feedbacks. Please make sure you fill them out before you leave and just leave them in your table or your chair. Without further ado, we're going to have our first presenter. You can go ahead. Katie, sorry, there's a lot of presenters today. Thank you.
See here. Okay. So hi, I am Katie Fisk-Pulliam. And we are giving a talk today on crops under cover, yielding the advantages of protective row covers. And there's a lot of us here. There's some researchers from UK, and then we also have 4 growers from Kentucky that are also going to share some of the things that they've learned or they've experienced with row covers. So at I don't know how long in, but kind of towards the end, we're going to have an audience question time. And I believe this is the QR code for Slido, so you guys can enter your questions at that time, and then we'll do a question time later. All right, now we get into the presentation. So one of the last organic research, OREI, so Organic Research Extension Initiative grant that we got, we surveyed 3 different regions in the U.S. And asked them what their top challenges were for growing. And those of the top 10 challenges that growers face, they all fall into 3 really distinct categories of biological, climate, and economic challenges. And the top 4 of those being insect pressure, heavy rain events, diseases, and weed pressure. And so we found from some of our research that pest protective row covers are a dual solution to some of these challenges that growers face. And I'm sure most of you all are very familiar with using types of row covers for frost protection, but also different kinds of netting to exclude insect pests. And in fact, most of you are already using some type of row cover for protection. And there's a lot of different types of netting in particular that folks can use. Our group has worked a lot with the 60 gram, 85, and 25 gram netting. Last year, we used the 85 gram and the 25 gram in some of our research experiments. And so this table just shows a little of, not all pests that they exclude, but some of the pests that we work with. The 60 gram has a little bit bigger of a mesh size and will protect against cucumber beetles, squash bugs, squash vine borer, potato beetles, stink bugs. It will protect against caterpillars, but not if they come up from the soil. They can become trapped underneath the row cover. Then the 85 gram is just a little bit smaller of a mesh size, which protects against all the same pests, but also spotted wing Drosophila if you grow brambles or berries or anything. And then the 25 gram is the smallest mesh size that we've worked with, and that one will exclude all the same pests, but also flea beetles. But it is a thinner, more stretchy material, so it is prone to more tears than the 60 or the 85 gram. And so, as I'm sure most of you know, the traditional use of row covers, people have used them on a lot of different scales and sizes, high tunnels, but what we mostly focus on is the mesotunnel or the mid-range size, and also low tunnels, even though I know that some people are still using nets in or on high tunnels as well, but we mostly focus on these smaller sizes. And so from that same survey that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we also asked growers what they think row covers can provide. And so a lot of them, or most of them, agree that row covers reduce vulnerability to weather. They reduce spraying insecticides, and they improve produce quality and yield. And we have a lot of research from our group and others that does back this up. Row covers do, in fact, increase yield relative, at least, to organic sprays in a bunch of different crops, greens, eggplant, squashes, and berries. But what growers really disagree on is whether or not row covers can reduce input costs. And they are not really wrong. So this is the cost of buying either the 85 gram or the 25 gram netting, just one roll that would cover 328 feet by 26 feet, and that's between $1,200 and $1,600. So we have a few questions. What can we do to reduce these costs? Are there other crops we can use? Is there a way that we can make sure the yield benefits outweigh the cost of these row covers? And so I guess another question too is how many times can we use these row covers to eventually reduce the costs? So if we use them 3, 5, or 15, that could lower your costs down to about $100. Although we do have some questions for the 25 gram if it can make it that many uses just because the material's so thin. And so this is where our Crops Under Cover team steps in. So we're a multi-state collaboration between Cornell, Iowa State, UK, the Organic Center, and then we also have an advisory board and on-farm collaborators that are working with us on these different questions. And so pictured here is just the UK research team. And there's a lot of us here, so even with other states, this is a really big team working on this. And these are some of our overarching objectives for the project. The first one being is really looking at what different crops benefit from these row covers. We also want to look at the cost effectiveness of the row covers and how to maximize that. And then the third one is using surveys to really understand organic farmer, consumer, and industry perceptions of row cover use. And then the last part is the outreach component. So we really want to make sure that we get out what we're learning to the public. And the first one and the fourth one are really what we're focusing on today with you all. So really quickly, to set up for Elaine's part coming up, I just wanted to kind of explain how we would use or reuse the row covers during one season by rotating one row cover on 3 different crops in a single growing season. So you'd start with your spring crop, some kind of brassica or whatever you grow. You would cover that. And then you'd have your summer crop that you plant, and you go ahead and move that same row cover to your summer crop. Same thing, you'd plant your fall crop, and then move that row cover that was on your summer crop to your fall crop. So that essentially, you bought one row cover and you've used it through 3 different crops in one growing season. And that is exactly what we did last year. So we had a spring planting, a summer planting, and a fall planting, and we used one piece of row cover and used it through those 3 different experiments. So we've used it 3 times so far out of potentially 9 times for this whole, I think it's a 3 to 4 year grant cycle. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elaine, and she's going to share what we've learned.
Hi everyone, I'm Elaine Loskamp. I'm a master's student in the lab. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about our research that we did in 2024 at the University of Kentucky Horticulture Research Farm. Oh, how do I go back? There we go. All right. So up here on the screen, I have a list of the different crops that we grew at the research farm last year under row covers. And I'll note that we have pilot crops and main crops shown here on the screen. Most of our research focused on the main crops, and those were bok choy in the spring, eggplant in the summer, and Napa cabbage in the fall. And I'll go into a little more detail momentarily about the distinction between the main crops and the pilot crops. But just wanted to highlight here that we tried out row covers across 3 seasons, as Katie alluded to. And we chose these crops because a lot of them have some major insect pest problems, and we wanted to see how well row covers would work at reducing that insect pest pressure. So just to run through really quickly, for our brassica crops, we see a lot of issues with flea beetles, harlequin bugs, and then various caterpillar species. And all of these insects will have feeding damage that can make the crops unmarketable or even kill them. For our cucurbit crops, we're looking at cucumber beetles, squash bugs, and squash vine borers. So squash vine borers are they will go and bore into the vines and then lay their eggs, and then that can cause a lot of damage because the squash vines will wilt and then potentially die. And then cucumber beetles and squash bugs are vectors of some pretty serious diseases. And then for eggplant, some serious pests that we see are Colorado potato beetles and flea beetles, and again, their feeding damage can be very problematic for the plants. So as I mentioned, we had our main crops that we looked at where we did a row cover rotation across 3 seasons. So we looked at row covers on a large scale. We took a whole 300-foot long by 50-foot wide field, divided it into 4 equal blocks, and then within each of those blocks, we had 4 equal-sized plots. And we randomly ordered 4 treatments within each block, and those treatments were 2 different configurations of row covers, an organic insecticide rotation, and then an uncovered, unsprayed control. And I'll go into a little more detail in all of this in a moment. But just something to note is that we had 30-foot long plots with 3 beds of crops. So we had 1 big row cover covering that whole space for all of our row cover treatments. Whereas with our pilot crops, we looked at those on a much smaller scale. For each of these, we were just comparing a row cover to an uncovered control treatment, and we just had 1 replication of most of these crops. So the question is, how do row covers do in terms of yield and pest pressure? And what we're seeing in general is that using row covers can really increase yield relative to a control where you're not using insecticides or a row cover. So this graphic here shows the yield improvement under a row cover. So for instance, the top line, the yield from eggplant under row cover was 16.6 times greater than the yield from eggplant in our control plots. So we have a couple things to note here. One being that this data is just from our 2024 experiments at the University of Kentucky Horticulture Research Farm. So we could do this again and see a little bit of variation. And then also that we're seeing a lot of variability between the different types of crops. So some crops like eggplant, we're seeing a huge difference in yield. And then down towards the bottom with green beans, basil, and bell pepper, we're seeing almost no difference in the yield when we use a row cover or no row cover. But all that being said, the highest performing crop groups that we saw last year were brassicas, eggplant, and cucurbits. And as you'll recall, we did our main crops, 2 brassicas being bok choy and napa cabbage, and then eggplant, so we have a lot more data, and I'll go into some more details about those too. So starting out, we did bok choy in the spring, and here we compared an uncovered control to an 85-gram row cover, an organic insecticide rotation, and then a combination of that 85-gram row cover plus organic insecticide. And you'll note that the control, where we had no spray, no row cover, had no marketable yield whatsoever. And that's because flea beetles completely decimated those crops, and so they were ruined. But we did see that when we combined the row cover and the organic insecticide, that increased yield 2.2 times compared to just using an insecticide. And to give you a visual, up on the left side of the screen is a typical bok choy from the control. So you can see it's filled with holes from the flea beetle feeding damage. And on the right side, that is a bok choy from our combination of row cover and organic insecticide. So there's a big difference there, and the control we would deem to be unmarketable. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to highlight some of the differences between the row cover types. So as I mentioned, we used just the 85-gram row cover for our bok choy because we thought that it could keep out the flea beetles, but we found out that the flea beetles for brassicas were small enough that they could wriggle through the holes in the row cover, and so that's what they did in the spring and caused some damage to our row cover treatment bok choys. And so we started using 25-gram row cover for our fall brassica planting, and we're seeing that there are some trade-offs between the two. So the 85-gram row cover is a lot more durable, and we used it for 3 seasons, spring, summer, and fall last year without seeing substantial damage. But the 25-gram row cover, we used it for just about a month and already started seeing some tears, as you can see in that bottom photo up there. So just something to consider if you're choosing to use row covers. It's important to think about trade-offs with insect pests, relative size, and durability. So moving along with our brassicas, we grew Napa cabbage in the fall. And here we compared the 2 types of row covers that I just discussed, and then an organic insecticide rotation and a control. And we saw that using an 85-gram row cover increased yield the most, 4.7 times relative to the uncovered control. We didn't see super high flea beetle pressure, but we did have a lot of problems with armyworms in the fall, and they caused a lot of damage. But one thing to note outside of pests, we saw that the Napa cabbages that we grew under row cover were ready to be harvested about a week earlier than those from the uncovered treatments. So even outside of pest issues, you can see some other benefits to using row covers. And finally, our last main crop that we looked at was eggplant. And something to note about eggplant is that it is a pollinator-dependent crop. And if you're using a row cover that excludes insect pests, you're also going to be excluding your insect pollinators. And so there are a couple workarounds you can do. And we tested out 2 different workarounds. So we used an 85-gram row cover for both of these treatments, but in one, we completely removed the row cover when the plant started to flower, and in the other, we opened the ends of the high tunnels when the plant started, or the mesotunnels when the plant started to flower. And we saw that keeping the row cover on for the full season, both open ends, increased yield the most. It was more than double that of the treatment where we removed the row cover at flowering, and then it was almost 7 times greater than organic insecticide and 16.6 times greater than the control. So some big yield improvements there. And so we have looked at the results from each of our crops separately, but a big part of this research experiment is looking at a holistic view of how farmers can actually incorporate row covers into their farms and what it would look like for a crop rotation. And so the graph here on the screen shows the projected revenue from using an 85-gram row cover, an organic insecticide rotation, and then a control. And so what we did was we took the actual yield data from each of those treatments for our 3 main crops, and then we took average prices for each of those crops and then estimated what the revenue would be had we sold those crops. So as you can see, the 85-gram row cover revenue would be the highest. It's 40% higher than the insecticide, I think around 7 times higher than the control. And then this obviously isn't taking into account things like labor and material costs, and so we're hoping to do more research and get a better sense of that later, but we can see that revenue can be higher for row cover. So all of that to say, row covers can have a lot of advantages, but there are also a lot of challenges that are inherent to using them. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail about all of these challenges, but as you can see on the screen, there are some. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about weed management and weather events. So row covers can really be either a challenge or a benefit with weather events. If your row cover isn't properly secured, then it can get blown off during a heavy weather event. And so we'll talk about that more in a second. But first, I wanted to mention weed management. So this has been one of the bigger obstacles that we've seen with our experimental design. As I mentioned, we have one big row cover that's covering 3 beds of crops. And so in the furrows between the crops, we have to figure out how to manage weeds. So concurrently with our main crop pest experiments, this year we also did a set of experiments with the main crops where we varied what we did in the furrows between beds of crops under row covers. And so For each bok choy, eggplant, and Napa cabbage, we had a whole field worth of experiments. And for a third of the plots, we used landscape fabric. For a third, we had a control where we just let weeds grow. And then for a third, we had a cover crop. And what we saw was that for the cool season crops, it didn't make a huge difference in terms of impacts on yield or pest pressure or the weed management that we had to do in the furrows, which of the treatments we used. But in the summer, we did have to do a lot of additional work for the bare ground control and the cover crop because the plants in the furrows grew very quickly. So we had to completely remove the row covers and all the sandbags and then mow in the furrows, which was pretty laborious. But we had some pretty good results with the landscape fabric. Not only did we not need to do any additional management to suppress the weeds, we also saw that there was actually an increase in the yield for the eggplant that was grown with landscape fabric relative to those two other treatments. And then finally, to touch on extreme weather events, as I'm sure you're all aware, we've had a lot of extreme weather over the past couple years in Kentucky. And so with this project, we wanted to know if using row covers can help protect crops from extreme weather. And what we're seeing is that there does seem to be benefits from using row covers. So to test this out, we had weather stations that we put out in the field for the whole growing season last year from April to September. And we continuously collected data from our full season 85-gram row cover treatments and from our uncovered controls. And to illustrate this, we had weather stations out in the field when Hurricane Helene hit last September. And so this graph here shows the average wind speeds from our weather stations. So that top blue line is from the weather stations that were uncovered in the field, and then the line below it is from the weather stations that were under row cover. And what we saw was that on average, the wind speeds were about 3 times higher in the field compared to the row covers. So the row covers are definitely conveying a bit of protection for the plants. And even outside of pest protection, we're seeing some positive benefits from using row covers. And with all that being said, my time is up, so I'm going to switch us over to our farmer panelists, and we're going to start hearing their experiences about using row covers on their farms.
Microphone, or do you want to stand over there? Okay. And she has the clicker if you want.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So my name is Maggie Dungan. There we go. I live in Woodford County, which is about half an hour away. I have a diversified, certified organic vegetable operation. We grow year-round. We grow probably 45 different crops, value-added things, farmers market, kind of standard market garden style production. I've been a part of this project for, I think, 3 years now. And we've definitely grown a variety of crops, and I would say some are better than others. So our first trial, we did cantaloupes. I've never been a good melon grower, still really not am, but those melons that we grew that year under the insect netting were beautiful. A grade, sold every single one. The only downfall was where if you grow melons, you get a multiple crop off a single vine, succession of flowers that need to be pollinated. So we had left our ends open on the ends to pollinate initially, and that worked fabulously. But then we closed it up to protect the plants. And so we couldn't really get that second, third flush because, it doesn't always happen at the same time. So that's something to think about. Maybe we could have left the ends open and they would have been fine. I don't know. But in other crops that I do really find a lot of benefit is eggplant, as is shown before, and then summer squash, so squash and zucchini. We still continue to use the insect netting on those. I don't remember what my slides look like. I'm very sorry. Here's a picture of my farm from Google Maps. So, yeah, you'll see that we have 4 high tunnels, and I'm going to talk about the insect netting with those as well, even though that was not quite part of this project. This is 2024 research. This is a little eggplant. I think Katie put this little like bow tie on the plant, and it's super cute. I wish I had a picture. I'm terrible at taking pictures. I wish I had a picture of this plant full grown, because it looked like a doily just eaten alive by flea beetles, Colorado beetles. Like, I mean, not even sure it even got to produce any fruit. So we mainly use the insect netting with the eggplant for the Colorado beetles and then the flea beetles. Even though the gram that we're using, they can get in there, it absolutely like buffers them to get big enough to withstand any kind of damage. This is inside one of our high tunnels, and you can kind of see on the side, we put the same type of insect netting, the Protonec, and mainly for our cucumber crops. So we grow all our cucumber crops inside tunnels, trellised up, and I would never grow it any other way, not being protected by the insect netting to keep out the cucumber beetles. Of course, they kind of eventually get in, but we are able to have a cucumber crop. We make a lot of pickles, so it's very important to us. Whether you grow cucumbers in a high tunnel or not, you can put them under the low hoops. Definitely use the insect netting. But I think UK established that as well. Pros and cons. Obviously, higher quality produce. She talked about the weather. We saw less hail damage. We had hail, I guess, last year, and protected the crops. Excludes predators, traps beneficials, so we will release beneficials under the tunnels and inside our high tunnels. But you see, here's a praying mantis that's trapped inside my high tunnel and hopefully living a happy life. And then plant life extended. I generally do 1 planting of summer squash and zucchini because it's able to last as long. The cons, obviously it's expensive, and that will really depend on your scale. The extra labor, that's such a minor con, just taking it off, putting it back on, setting up the hoops, you do that once. Traps predator. So if you do have like a population of something that comes from the soil, it's going to be trapped in there, and it gets, it's hard to get out because they're trapped under there and they're just going to propagate. And then, like I mentioned before, and the wildlife. So last year, I was harvesting the summer squash, and I was like, oh, what's that fuzzy little white thing? Oh yeah, it was a skunk. We did not get all the squash that day. I don't even know how it got under there. And then the limited pollination, like I was talking about with the melons. But honestly, with the eggplant and the summer squash, I did not see that quite as an issue. We leave the ends open, and they seem to produce well enough. I can't speak much to brassicas. I've just not have a positive experience. We have a really bad flea beetle problem, and anytime I try to use row covers just outside of this project on arugula or something like that, I get that trapped predator or trapped insect under there kind of problem. But UK had success, so farm your own farm. I don't think there's any more pictures of me. Nope, sorry. Oh, sorry. Back. Stealing your thunder. And so now I'm going to pass it on.
Okay. Again, for those who know me and those who do not, my name is Keith McKenzie, and I'm an owner and operator of Now Hill Farm. We're located in Brackenridge County, and here you can see the beginning of our season here, and got a greenhouse over there. We use some black plastic here, and then this, I think it's low cat. You got the black plastic and the low cat, and then that is like a frost protection netting. And then across there on the other side is a really small mesh, and I think it's one of the, you should talk about the picture of it where it was tearing up. You could look at it and it would tear up. But under that particular, you know what's not in that picture is the 85-gram mesh from UK. But back to across the way there, under there I had mixed leafy lettuce, carrots, beets, and turnips. And I had a really good production under that netting. Let me see here. So it's a little bit history here. And I start off with this here. One of the reasons why we wanted to really look into the netting is to increase production. At the end of the day, we want to be able to present to the community a good, healthy product. And I thought I would kind of demonstrate that here. And what happened for myself is that a few years ago, we had brassicas, and the bugs just devastated it. I mean, it was just horrible. I mean, you guys can imagine what that could be like, right? And so I had cabbage, and I think it was one of the better years of cabbage. I had a small organic cabbage from Johnny Seeds. You guys familiar with that cabbage? And folks love it, but the bugs just attacked it to no end. I had broccoli, cauliflower, and collard greens, and they did not produce to the point where we really wanted them to produce. The outcomes was horrible in so many words. And so, and fast forward to last year, I met Brianna. I was crying to Brianna about my outcomes. And she said, let me introduce you to Dr. David over here. Maybe we can help you out with that. And that's where we find ourselves here when talking about row cover. Now we have the 85-gram mash here. What you can't see is where my wife is at on the left-hand side. We planted a whole row of eggplants. The eggplants outside of this netting here was more productive than the eggplant in the netting. And now the reason why now, and listen to you guys talk, is because the pollination process. Now, the bugs didn't eat them up. The ones under the netting would look really good, but it didn't, the plants themselves, but they didn't produce for whatever that's worth. And then your lowcat here on the right-hand side is your frost protection netting. And then I had a whole roll, a 100-foot roll of collard greens here that did not have any netting. Now, I did have the first 50 feet of this first of the 85 grain, I had collard greens in there. And so my goal this year was to get production. It was to increase a yield, not increase yield, but to get something back, because the prior 2 years I got nothing. And I'm determined to figure out how to put collard greens and brassicas in production. Now, not to the point where it's going to be a huge commercial scale, because I'm not wanting to scale up to where I'm doing 100,000 pounds of vegetables and so on and so forth. Just to the point where I could do a manageable farmer's market and a few CSAs, and not looking to do like some of our colleagues here, Bar Farm or Root Bound. Those guys is kicking ass, right? And I understand, I love their operation. I learn from them a lot and so on and so forth, but that's not the subscription that we're looking at prescribing to. But it's working for us so far, because I think, and now you get to see a bigger picture of what's going on. We got 1, 2, 3, 4 plots, including the greenhouse. So you're looking at a little less than 2 acres as an operation here. This little hoop house here is where we do our seedlings and so on and so forth. This year is our biggest increase in understanding bugs, bug pressure. We made the biggest gain in able to identify the bugs and how to provide treatment. And I thought maybe one of the treatments would be an organic a spray or something like that. And at the end of the day, I think being able to go under the netting, count your bugs, and then remove them by hand. It's a lot of work, folks, but I think that's the most effective because you don't want to get in the business of killing good bugs and indiscriminately just pulling everything up by the roots and getting rid of everything. But my point is that we made our biggest leap this past year. One of the, and I know the researchers earlier talked about the benefit of netting and during a storm. I think this is a couple examples of how the netting was rendered after one of the storms. Of course, this 25 grain is if you look at it, or sneeze, it's going to tear. But what, to my surprise, though, was the 85 grain, a more robust netting. And I was just scared to death that because it was removed, would the bugs get in under our netting and decimate the crop. And at this point, it did not happen. Now, will I do this again? I'd love to. I can't wait to do more netting. I can't wait. My mind is running full time on how it can be beneficial and how I can use it in the years to come. Now, it also here, so the 25 gram mesh in this plot 2 here, the water in the wind took it out, but still the water can play a role in your crop. And here I lost this whole row of cucumbers here due to the water and storm damage. It has nothing to do with the netting, but if you can see to the left, the netting here, it was removed with this storm here as well. You said we had 2 or 3 experiences of severe weather. I'm thinking, man, I'm thinking we had more than that. How much stuff was going on last year. I thought this was pretty neat to be able to show the bug identification, the learning experience. This was hands-on. Now, listen, this is not at a high yield or a commercial production type thing. This is something that's manageable. The capacity is workable for us. But by identifying the bugs and that sort of stuff, it's been very helpful. So now I'll know how to perhaps open up the netting more, take the netting off. My biggest thing this first year is, oh my God, I'm not going to remove the netting. But I understand now we can remove the netting when our production is down and so on and so forth. But as I conclude here, we found the bug here on the collard greens that we weren't able to identify. And then we found this hornworm on the tomatoes that found itself onto our collard greens. And it was kind of interesting to find that. So this has been a very beautiful experience for us, and we can't wait to look what's around the corner the next season. And yes, you got to have family time. You got to have some fun. There you go.
Thank you. So, John Bell from Elmwood Stock Farm in Georgetown. The whole farm's 380 acres, 35 acres of produce, livestock species, a little bit of grain cover crop as well. Most of our marketing's retail, CSA, farmers market, a little bit of wholesale and direct store delivery. Covers, big picture, the way I usually approach everything. So crops under cover, the different ways we use covers in general on the farm, high tunnels, frost blankets, or agribond or remay. Tarping, still on a love-hate relationship. I keep trying tarping, quitting, trying again, quitting. And then netting is a definite keeper for us. High tunnels, both season extension, so tomatoes on the right start in late March and goes into late October, with field tomatoes in the summer, but we use it for season extension on the tomatoes. And then winter production of leafy greens, And there's a picture of some of our high tunnels on the left there. A couple different brands or manufacturers. Frost blankets, Typar, Remay, Agribon, so everybody's familiar with that, but play a big role inside our high tunnels right now in the wintertime. The double layer gives you quite a few degrees of frost protection. We used to use it on, as everyone probably is familiar with, but it used to also be some insect control, and just it's a disaster. I don't think I have a picture in here of it, but we have tons of Agribon still in trees 3 years later from trying to cover in the spring and fall for insect protection and losing it to storms. So tarping, I said, love, hate. Sometimes it works. It's just seasonal, getting the time down, how long it's out there, how long it's on. If we did a good seed bed, got a good seed germination, it works well. Sometimes it's been on there 3 or 4 weeks, take it off, plant, never weed, known to man, still comes up. So we're still working on that. Netting. So for us, we were fortunate to participate, have both, initially I guess UK did a couple of demonstration plots on our farms. Mark Williams and some melon trials years and years ago, saw it up close and personal there. Then as part of these projects, they encouraged us to try it on some of our winter squash and melons was our initial introduction to it on the farm. I am not a good melon grower with netting or without netting. And so it didn't really help. I mean, I'm not a good melon grower, and it didn't help me make me better, but it's the best way to put it. And then the flip side, with winter squash, we do winter squash both on plastic and bare ground and a couple of different plantings and it's kind of an important crop to us, I guess. And so we kind of already do sequential plantings in a couple of different ways. And frankly, there was a difference with the netting on the winter squash, but it wasn't significant enough. It wasn't a no-brainer for us to continue there, but it was the introduction to the netting, and so we've applied it. Where we've had great success with it is primarily flea beetles, harlequin beetles, and starting to use it on dahlias for lygus bug control. We're using primarily the 85 gram. We've used a bunch of different ones, different manufacturers as well, but by far, like the 85 gram, the best. There is some flea beetles that get inside and or hatch underneath and come up. You know, it doesn't have to go through the netting, but we found a significant control. So we do a lot of Asian greens. So there's lettuce. Underneath the netting there is Asian greens, mizuna, arugula, bok choy, tatsoi, that kind of stuff. And kind of on a 5-week turnaround, direct sowing. And so with that system, that's 85. In the middle picture, that's 85 gram netting that will be used 4 or 5 times through the summer. In this past year, we just finished our 4th year with a few of the nets. So that gives you an idea. You know, we're handling it daily, weekly, and we're using it throughout the summer on 4 or 5 different beds. And some of them have lasted through the 4th year. So we had a lot of, I'll talk about some of the pros is the wind and lack of less wind damage than row cover, Agribon type stuff by far. Hardly ever have any blow off. With that said, we did have it blow off a couple times this summer, and the 2 oldest ones, the 2 4-year-old, one of them was messed up enough we threw it away. The other one we sewed it up and put it right. It's still back in service, just to give you an idea of the durability. There's the structure. So we kind of gone to a long ways structure rather than the hoops, at least on these beds that we're in every day or every other day. Makes it easier to, so the bed on the left is finished, hasn't been turned under. The picture of that is so you can see the pipe system or the bow structure, whatever you want to call it. But that's been harvested and, you know, probably getting ready to mow it and till it in before all the foxtail and weeds go to seed. And then you can see the sequential beds to the right. And there's 3 or 4 that you can see in the background. But hoeing, weeding, pushing a wheel hoe, that kind of stuff, it's just easier to get through it. Also easier to get through it harvesting by not having the crossways hoop system. Okay, so I've kind of touched on some of this. Bunching green, so we do hoops over black plastic with kale and collards. So the traditional structure, I guess, that we learned when we did the winter squash. So we still bunching green kale or bunching collards. We do on plastic with the bows and the same netting. Again, it's for flea beetle control primarily. We do that same structure on Brussels sprouts to keep harlequin beetle primarily is the main target pest there. So that's on plastic with the PVC bows that you've seen. But Asian greens, bunching greens, Brussels sprouts is pretty successful. Dahlias, we've been doing the bags on the dahlias, but we're thinking about doing this whole field netting over the dahlias. And then, the positives, the experiences, I have seen weather reduction, so there's less heat stress. That actually does have a shading effect, but it also seems to hold the heat in. It actually does speed up growth of stuff. So it's kind of, to me, it's, besides the insect control, it's best of both worlds. It prevents hail damage, it prevents hard rain damage, prevents wind damage, but yet also kind of does an incubation without getting too hot. So I've been pretty impressed with the weather impact, unexpected weather impact that it had. It does not, to be as thick and heavy, it does not catch the wind, and it's a poor sail, unlike Remay or Agribond or row cover is a terrific sail and catches you sneeze on our farm, you sneeze and it's in the trees. So it's hard. This has really only been blown off a couple of times, knock on wood. Don't want to jinx myself. And it is repairable. Unlike Agribond, it's hard to tape it. We have a bunch of Agribond with duct tape and everything else on it, but this stuff you can sew it up with fishing line pretty well. It worked well for spotted wing Drosophila and raspberries, but it just didn't pencil out. For us, it didn't. The place we buy it is the berry patch, which does almost exclusively, the whole reason she does it is for berry protection. It just didn't work for us financially. Winter squash, an eggplant, I haven't had great success yet, but hopefully I will keep trying. Melons, like I said, I'm already poor at that anyway. I think I've touched on everything else. So I don't want to go much longer. The beneficials, Maggie touched on it. It is, by using this, we keep the flea beetles out, but maybe we trap aphids in, so you have to release beneficials, or there is the counter side of using the netting. You're keeping the good guys out. Yeah, I don't want to keep going, so I'll leave that up there. That's the berry patches where I've been getting mine.
There's that. And you just press the big one towards this way to move.
This one?
Yeah, the one in the center.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Sharon Stone of Two Sons Farm. I farm in downtown Lexington on 1/3 of an acre between two houses deep in the downtown area. My grow space, I normally grow greens, peppers, and a few other things that you guys can read up there. The space is surrounded by a lot of fruit trees, pawpaws, cherries, figs, and blackberries. So I've got a lot of raised beds in the area too. So last year I was approached by Brianna to bring on a collard green project, and it took a long time for me to agree to let her come onto the property and do this project, not because I didn't want her there, it's because I just did not grow collard greens anymore. And the reason why I didn't grow collard greens was because of the pest pressure. I even had some row cover a couple times, and the pests just got in. I just got frustrated, and I just said, no, I'm just not gonna grow them again. So she kept on asking me, and finally I just said, okay. Yeah. So this is the initial collard green row cover bed, and the one to the right of it is the one that stayed uncovered. At this point, we had taken out most of the collard greens at that time to transition off to something else. So this is what the collard greens looked like in the spring. And the reason why I added the after harvest picture was because I was so excited that I got to harvest some collard greens. Yeah. So, yeah. So these raised beds are 4 by 16. So if I did, say for instance, 40 plants in each one, I would probably get 192 pickings off of it. So in the years past, it would have been 0 because I wasn't growing any. So this project was a win-win, and I was so pleased with the way that they looked. I grew up eating collard greens only, and those look perfect to me. Oh, I skipped one. Okay. So in the spring trial, we had a heavy presence of flea beetles that we've all talked about so far. It was 10 times more in the uncovered versus the covered. And there was an abundance of, the abundance of the flea beetles died down, so it really didn't affect me being able to sell the greens. So this is the plot that was not covered. And notice the slide to the left, that's my arch nemesis, the harlequin bug. And so in the past, when I saw a couple of those on my plants, even if they were covered, I would just cut them all down and put something back in its place because I just didn't want to go through crop grief. But even with the heavy rains, and I had a couple of trees down last year too in the space, the row cover didn't move 1 inch. So I really think that we anchored them securely enough to the raised beds to where they wouldn't move. So this is another milestone for Two Sons Farm. So once I would pull up the collard greens right before June, I wouldn't grow greens again. So this is the crop that I got this last year in the fall. And the size of those greens are the size of the greens that I grew my first year in the Market Gardeners program through Seed Leaf. So we had an abundance of army worms that they were on the inside of the row covers, but I think it lasted for about 2 weeks, and then after that, they were gone, after we picked them off and everything. So like I said, I was pleased to have a spring harvest and a fall harvest. So in the fall trial, we had some white cabbage moths, some diamondback moths. For each of these pests, at least 5 times more were found in the uncovered versus the covered. We also had a lot of white flies that were found in abundance, but and we also had a few flea beetles too, but it didn't affect, me selling them, and we had a high yield from those collard greens as well. So, will I use row cover again this season? Absolutely. Yeah. So I've changed my mind about how to grow the collard greens with the row cover. I'll just have to take it out and be more aware of what's happening under the cover so that I can go in and pick out the insects and keep it moving.
You want to go to the next slide? Yeah. Do you want me to hold it? Oh, sure. All right, so now we're going to the audience questions. So there's the QR code for Slido, and I will pass it along to whoever here wants to answer, or if you have a particular question for somebody, just let us know. I see a hand up. Do you need help, or are you asking a question? Okay, well, I'll just go with you. Do you want the microphone?
We need it because it's being recorded. I planted mostly sweet potatoes all over my garden. I came here hoping to tell me what I could have done with my problem was that something was eating all of my plants back above the surface, and I think it was probably rabbits. I don't think I saw any what are the little guys, chipmunks this year. I've seen them in the past, but not this year. And I was hoping I'd hear something that would have helped me. And I think what I've learned by coming here is what wasn't said, that I really need some kind of metal cover, and I need to fence my garden better to keep the rabbits out. And I don't think any of the things you've talked about would have helped me, so.
Oh, okay. Should we leave this out then for people to, or then? I'll let you guys hold on to that one. This mic also works.
It's black plastic netting with little squares. It comes like 100-foot roll, 7 feet tall, and I just created that over, little hoops.
All right. So our top voted question so far is there a difference between one long row or multiple short rows when it comes to pollination efficiency? Do any of you all, or do you want us to answer? Okay.
Sounds like a you question.
Yeah, seems like a researcher question. So far, we have trialed the pollination efficiency. So we use those open ends on the ends of our plots in our experiments on 30-foot lengths, but also 120-foot long plots. And it does work on both of those. So some of my past research was on the 120-foot long plots. And we have found that pollinators are really good flyers, and they can make it through all the way down to the center of the plot. Compared to the pests are not usually as good of flyers. And so you may still get some pests when you have those ends open, but they kind of hang out on the edges, and they don't actually make it all the way down into the tunnel. So far, based on my research experience, we have found that it can get through the 120-foot long plots. I don't know much larger scale if that works, but at least 120 feet.
And from my farmer experience, I would agree. Ours are 100 foot long, and the pollinators definitely get in, kind of get trapped in there, which is a little sad sometimes. But bad bugs are dumb. They don't know how to go in.
Okay, the next top question is, what organic insecticide did you use with the row cover in the bok choy experiment? Again, I will answer that question because I was the one that sprayed. I rotated between Azera and Entrust, back and forth with those two. And I don't know, I guess you can see from the yield, it does kind of work, but it does not do as well as the... Entrust and Azera were the two products. So that's Entrust, I think, is spinosad, is the chemical or the pesticide, and then Azera is azadirachtin and neem. But those are the two products I used. And gosh, I can't remember how many. I basically sprayed every week that we had the experiment. So I think, was it 7? What? I sprayed less? But in the organic one, I sprayed.
I think it was 5.
We think it's 5. I don't remember how long it was in the plot, but since it was a research experiment and we had a specific organic treatment, I did spray that one every week it was in the field, and we think it was in the field for 5 weeks. The combined organic insecticide and row cover one, that one I ended up spraying, I guess, 1 week less. So that was 4 weeks. Because we did not know the flea beetles could get through, and we panicked. So I started spraying that one too. Okay, next question that is most popular is somebody is interested in the structure of the various row covers. How do you best anchor and secure them? One of you all.
So I'll let others speak, but I think you could see that we kind of all did them a little differently. I use my own invention, which I call a gravel snake. It's a long tube of lay flat that I filled with gravel. I did a farmer hack on it for oak, so you can go to their YouTube site and watch how to make it. But I just noticed that these other farmers use sandbags, or I don't know if anybody wants to comment.
Yeah, with the 85 grain mesh, we did a 100-foot row, and on each end we did a rebar, and then we kind of slanted it at an angle, and we bunched up the mesh, and then wrapped it around, and then took a twine, I think hay bale twine, and then secured it that way. And then along the side of it, we used the sandbags to secure the sides. Now, one of the reasons why I think we used it that way is that we would go up inside our netting throughout the season. I didn't secure it to a point where it was impenetrable for the whole season, but just FYI.
I'll just say from experience that we've had so far, with row cover on the low down, just using sandbags or lay flat to hold it down is what we came from starting with. These elevated structures, we've had better luck, and I think I saw on one of your slides, tying the ends to kind of keep it taut to begin with, and then using the bags on the sides. And then, so we use lime bags or lay flat with water in it for the summer. We'll drain them in the winter. And then we'll use bricks as well, just not in the wintertime because they'll freeze to it. But the lime bags, combination of lime bags, bricks, and lay flat is what we use.
We used a metal frame that was the same size as the perimeter around the raised beds, and there were clamps on each side. So we were able to put the hoops on the inside of the clamps and then cover it up. I think that's the reason why it was able to withstand all the harsh weather that we got last year. I did not. The folks at UK made it for me, and they just brought everything to the area and put it together.
Yeah, just to add on to what Sharon said, the frame that we built for her was just made out of the EMT, the electrical conduit, and we just bent it in the shape of her bed. And there's different hardware that you can buy to attach the hoops to it. See, somebody has a question in the back. Linnell's coming. Oh.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. This is the easiest for me.
Clothespins, and I just pinned them. I pinned them because I have 70-mile-per-hour winds where I am routinely. So I just use clothespins, and I have lots of access to firewood because I have a hardwood forest. So all I did was use lots of clothespins, and it got through a lot of high wind storms doing what I did, and cost me $2 at the dollar store for the clothespins. That's all I did.
Thanks. See, we learn from everybody. All right.
In the off season, we used tomato stakes, lined tomato stakes on each side, and then wire staples, and that kept the sides down really well too. And then we would just bunch the end, really tight, and then use a staple into the ground. That would keep it pretty secure too.
Okay. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go back to the questions on the screen. Another one is, some varieties of squash can get rather large. Do you select smaller varieties, or do you prune them somehow? And then also, do you remove the covers to harvest? Any thoughts from you all?
I'm assuming you're talking about summer squash? All right, I'm just going to go with summer squash. I personally try to pick kind of like open, whatever they call it, like easier to harvest with less spines and stuff. And yes, we take our covers off to harvest and then just put them back on when we're done. But no pruning, because that's extra work.
I'll just talk real quick about winter squash since we did it several years for the project. Some of the varieties, we tried bush varieties. Some of them were pushing on the netting by the time we were harvesting. They did, we used bows, PVC pipes and bows. But with that said, there were still some varieties that was filling up that space for sure. We take the netting off to harvest, to pollinate. Part of the research was releasing pollinators inside, taking the netting on, off, or open ends. We'd take it off to let it pollinate, cover it back. We'd harvest it once, put the netting back on, and then clear harvest the second time was kind of the structure. But yes, some of the vining varieties and the bush varieties too were pushing on the netting pretty good by the end.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Is there any burning questions in the audience that you didn't put on Slido that you like to ask, or I can just read the one here?
Question.
Okay.
It's not really a burning question, but I felt it was important. Do any of you ever wash your row covers? Like, do they last long enough for you to feel the need to sanitize them, or like, have you just not had any issues with?
If you have the washing machine to fit that, I will come to you.
Well, that was going to be my next follow-up. Was like, do you have any methods for washing?
I wish. I mean, same with like the row cover, frost protection row covers we have. I really would love to clean them. I mean, they're very large. So if anybody has any, I don't know if you all. It's hard enough to fold them. Yeah.
We have a question here.
Okay, so I guess we don't have any good answer for you. I'm sorry. One more, and then we got to move on.
Real quick, how long do you leave the ends open for pollination?
That is a good question. It kind of depends on what crop you're growing. For the eggplants, I think we left them open. Well, no, we left them open continuously. So once they started flowering, we just left them open for the rest of us harvesting them, because we went under the row covers to harvest and didn't take them off. For things like cucurbits, once you see the first female flowers, not the male flowers, they come a little bit later. We left them off for like 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, and then put them back on or closed them.
So for opening the ends, we'll pull the end of the row cover up and then clip it to the hoops. Yeah, so it'll be like about maybe 3 feet off the ground.
All right, we're going to move on just to wrap up, but we're still going to be here. Well, at least Elaine and I are going to be here afterwards out at our table, so you can ask us more questions if you have them or find our farmers. Now, do you think I think the next one will be
All right, so one quick thing before we completely end the session. I just wanted to shout out that we are doing an on-farm research study with our lab. So we're hoping to work with 20 different fruit and vegetable growers throughout the state in the summer of 2025. Got a little bit of information up here on the screen. But basically what we're doing is just partnering with growers for them to have a row cover on a crop of their choice throughout its growing season. We will have before and after surveys to see what you think, and then we'll have 3 site visits throughout the growing season. And we'll give people row covers to keep, and there will be compensation for your time. And if you are interested in learning more, we are at the Crops Under Cover table outside in the hallway, and I have more information. My contact information is up there as well. And we just wanted to thank everyone who helped us with this project, from our collaborators in the lab to our funders and our collaborators with Cornell, Iowa State, and the Organic Center. Thank you.